If you think about it, Singapore should have never survived. I mean, is there a bigger turnaround success story anywhere in the world than Singapore's? When they were suddenly kicked out of Malaysia, Singapore's GDP was the same as Ghana's. But against all odds, the Lion City has risen to become the world's second busiest shipping port, the shining star of Southeast Asia, and one of the richest countries in the world. In fact, if you plotted all the countries in the world by income and expected lifespan, there is Singapore way up in the top corner. Everything from the way they do business and govern, even the way the country was formed, defy conventions. And as luck would have it, just before I land to discover it all for myself, I find out my absolute best friend from high school is visiting the same time as me. In fact, Matt grew up in Singapore, and this is his first time back in 15 years. Wowee! What a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to sit down with my best friend for an amazing and powerful interview.
I'm a big camera shy.
Okay, I guess I'll just go fuck myself then. No, I get it. But Matt and I did have a chance to run all over the city for 3 days, making silly faces and rehashing stories from our childhood.
Remember when you tried to catch a tadpole with your butt? Yeah, I do.
Ah yes, good fun. But seriously, Matt was nice enough to share with me his experience here, and after all his stories and a bunch of research on my own, I left with 3 main takeaways. Number 1, this city is pretty fascinating. Just one walk down the streets and you'll find yourself captivated by the city's cosmopolitan sensibilities. As William Gibson once wrote in Wired magazine, the whole city feels like Disneyland, and with the colorful streets, playful architecture, covered outdoor areas, and boat rides along the waterways, he's kinda right. And then, of course, there is the food. Oh my god, the food. Singapore is a true melting pot, combining Malay, Chinese, and Indian cultures, and you can find all these influences just mere feet from each other in any of the city's famous hawker stalls. Now, Singapore ain't exactly cheap, but in the hawker stalls, I had some of the most incredible $4 meals I have ever had in my life. Singapore even sports the cheapest Michelin star restaurant anywhere in the world, Hawker Chan, which is both an incredibly popular hawker stall and an incredibly popular nearby restaurant, serving up their Michelin star winning soya chicken with rice or noodles for about $2 or $3 US. Yeah, go ahead and beat that, Le Bernardin. Overall, I thought it was a very solid meal, but I still couldn't help but wonder how exactly it got the Michelin star. Overall, I give it 4 Jackson Rathbones out of a possible 5 Jackson Rathbones. The most iconic building of Singapore's skyline is surprisingly not the hairy one made out of vegetables and with a pool cave carved into the side of it. What? Okay, wow, missed opportunity, Singapore. No, the most iconic building is this, the Marina Bay Sands Hotel. Its design was inspired by a deck of cards being shuffled, but I think it looks like a cruise ship landed on top of 3 buildings and they just said, nah, it's cool, just leave it up there. But actually, the rooftop is home to one of the best infinity pools in the world, which I didn't get to go to because it's exclusively for hotel guests, and what am I, made of money? I didn't get to see the rest of the hotel, but I did get to spend ample time perusing the shops below, and the whole place is gorgeous. Fountains, lights, and 800,000 square feet of the nicest shops I can't afford. But every night they do offer one thing that's free, and it is spectacular. Gotta check out the light show. I have never seen anything like it, except in Disneyland. And after that, you are just a short stroll away from the Gardens by the Bay to see one of their national icons, the incredible Supertree Grove. And if you need to leave the city behind, just remember you can't. But probably the closest you can get is by heading to the Night Safari, the world's first truly nocturnal wildlife park. Now, most nocturnal houses just mess with animals' sleep cycles, so you can visit them during the day or whatever. But this park maintains the animals' natural sleep rhythms and only opens at night, and it's pretty rad. They have a trolley that brings you around in almost pitch black to see animals in their natural habitat, and some of them they will bring right to you. And I told you we spent most of our time making faces.
Gentle reminder, remember to turn off the flash on your cameras, okay? Now, Rocky is not the only
Number 2, rules. When I quoted William Gibson in Wired magazine as calling Singapore Disneyland, that wasn't quite the full story. The full title was famously Disneyland with the Death Penalty. Singapore hasn't been able to shake that title to this day, and it was enough to get Wired banned in the country. So let's talk a bit about that.
Singapore is an extremely ruly country, as in it has so many rules.
Listen, they are one of the only countries in modern history that had independence thrust upon them. The majority of countries that gained independence did so in some form or another through the usual dialogue of, "We heretofore break these shackles of oppression and declare our independence. We shall now fight to the death." And then everyone, fights to the death. But not Singapore. To make a long story short, the Malaysian parliament unanimously voted to expel Singapore in 1965 for several reasons, most of them involving political and racial tensions. With little land and no natural resources, this tiny little island nation state had to figure out a way to survive, and fast. They had no choice but to make this the best place in the world to do business. And did they ever? And you know what's bad for business? Mischief and or shenanigans. So what did they do? They made a million rules, of course. People were bad at throwing gum away, so it was banned. Literally, you can't buy it unless it's for medical reasons. Spitting, banned. Littering, if it's something small like a wrapper or a cigarette, it's a $300 fine. If it's something bigger like a bottle, they often make you show up to court and do street cleaning duty. Apparently, people used to pee in elevators. Disclaimer, don't do that. But most of them now are equipped with urine detection devices that will stop the lift, lock the door, and call the police.
Let's be honest, that's going to be an awkward conversation.
Not flushing a toilet is a $150 fine.
You can't buy an apartment if you're under 35 and single.
Ashley Madison, the website for extramarital affairs, was banned in 2013. Drugs are so totally illegal, the penalty is sometimes death. This is not a joke.
People are executed here for drug trafficking with some regularity, including 11 executions in 2018 alone.
But then again, my favorite band in the whole world, No Effects, found drugs in Singapore in like 20 seconds, so what do I know?
There's so many of us. Snap into businessman now. We're in Singapore. I got my coat on.
Canada reminds us if you test positive for drugs, you can be arrested and prosecuted, even if the drugs were consumed prior to your arrival in the country. TripSavvy suggests you might want to completely detox weeks before your flight, and that includes weed, so sorry Colorado, and 55 million other Americans. When it comes to rules, Singapore doesn't mess around. One high-profile case was Michael P. Fay, an 18-year-old American that got caught vandalizing cars with spray paint in 1994. The penalty was 2 months jail time and 6 counts of caning. Now, you might think, hey, the kid broke the rules, he's gonna get what's coming to him. But think about this for a second. The response to a non-violent act of vandalism was state-administered violence. Americans lost their mind over it. President Bill Clinton had to get involved and the caning was reduced, but still, wow, right? Some of these examples might seem a bit dated, but they all point to the same thing. Number 3, unique problems, unique solutions. Okay, credit where credit is due. Singapore is super resilient and crafty about tackling their problems. For instance, the country faces one of the lowest birth rates in the world, and they will soon have trouble replenishing their aging workforce. To remedy this, the government actually made a PSA to get people to take a one-way trip to the old bone zone. I'm being serious.
The parade is long gone, and the kids are in bed. Let's not watch fireworks, let's make a mistake. Yeah. It's national night, and I want a baby. Bro, I know you want it, so does the STU.
Now, I don't know about you, but nothing turns me on more than hearing my country's social development unit wants me to suck and fuck and eat ass to be a true patriot.
Let's make Singapore's birthday fine.
Is there anything hotter than a heart-wearing sneakers and a shit-eating grin staring into your soul while air-humping his literal birth rate penis at you? Well, again, points for creativity, I suppose. And they've applied that creativity to other problems too. To help prevent water shortages and limit reliance on Malaysia for water, because remember, they've had a rocky go of it in the past. They get 40% of their drinking water from what they've bottled and branded as new water. Because, hey guys, this used to be poo-poo and pee-pee, didn't have the same ring to it. This might be the single most well-planned and executed, dare I say, perfect city I've ever seen. To get a better idea of this impressive design, I chartered a very fancy and very expensive helicopter for a bird's eye view of the city in action. Actually, I went to the Singapore City Gallery where they talk about how precisely the city is laid out. Order in general permeates life here in Singapore because without it, this whole experiment starts to fail. Think about it. It's a large city with nearly 6 million people, or the population of Colorado, those dirty, dirty weed smokers, on an island about 2/3 the size of New York City's 5 boroughs. Now that might sound pretty manageable, but consider this. Everything here must be self-contained and meticulously laid out on the island state, which just isn't something the other cities have to deal with. Power plants, water treatment, housing, nature reserves, mass transit, arenas, highways, airports. These are all things other cities can put just outside their city limits with no issues at all. But in Singapore, if you want it in the country, it's gotta fit in the city. So it's a little bit like trying to put a golf course in the middle of Long Island City, and yet somehow Singapore has 21 of them. In fact, Singapore is so land hungry, they even made yet another government-sponsored PSA, this time making the tongue-in-cheek suggestion that Singapore marry Finland to get their land.
God, they just love a good PSA, don't they?
Okay, let's get down to it.
Singapore is the most modern and pristine place I've ever been in my life. You should absolutely go and love it. But if I think about living here long term, I couldn't help but feel it was missing something.
On my last day there, I realized what it was. I never once saw something that shocked me or left me speechless.
Street buskers played Blackbird. People wore shirts that said #selfie. The trains weren't late, there's no homeless people, and most every building looks like it was scrubbed down that morning. Beers are $11, spitting's illegal, and you can get killed for drugs. They've worked so hard to make this place a utopia for business, but they can't handle chewing gum. In New York, I once saw a man in his underwear with a bra on his head screaming, Now, I'm not saying that's good or bad, but you gotta admit it's lively. There's even a law that says you can't eat durians on the subway. Actually, I'm okay with that. Durians smell like shit. As a travel expert, it's not really my place to critique a culture, but part of me wonders if the whole Singapore experiment would actually fall apart if they just loosened their ties a little bit. In the interest of making everything perfect, they've engineered a society without crime or poverty. But maybe the next step is to add a little fun, a little soul, a little, I don't know, chewing gum?